There is a kind of darkness that lives underneath One Piece's brightest colors, tucked so far beneath the laughter and the sunny adventure that most readers pass over it without ever feeling its full weight. Tonight we go looking for that darkness, gently, slowly, the way you might walk through a familiar house after the lights have been turned off, trusting your memory of where the furniture sits. There are 150 secrets waiting in the quiet corners of this story, some small, some enormous, all of them real, all of them confirmed somewhere in nearly 3 decades of Eiichiro Oda's work. If this brings you calm, feel free to subscribe for more gentle One Piece stories, and let your eyes rest as we begin with a night that most of the world was never allowed to remember. 22 years before Luffy ever set sail, an island called God Valley hosted an auction of human beings, children and adults, sold like cargo beneath the banners of the world nobles, the descendants of the founding kings who still walk above the clouds today. What makes God Valley one of the story's darkest confirmed events is not simply that slavery was happening in the open. It is that it was happening as entertainment, a celebration with music and drink, while the people being sold stood chained on a stage. The Rock's pirates, the single most dangerous pirate crew in the story's history, attacked that celebration. Whether they came to save the captives or simply to seize the chaos, as opportunity has never been fully clarified, and Oda has left that ambiguity standing on purpose. What is confirmed is that a young Marine named Monkey D. Garp and a young pirate named Gold D. Roger set aside their rivalry for one single night and fought side by side against Rox D. Zebek's crew, a crew that included a young Kaido, a young Charlotte Linlin, a young Whitebeard, and very likely a young Shanks and Buggy watching from somewhere nearby. The battle ended with the Rock's pirates broken apart. It also ended, according to later implications in the story, with something else. Every celestial dragon present at God Valley that night was killed. The official records of the world government describe the incident differently. The truth of what happened to the world nobles that evening has been buried under an approved version of history, and the man now known as one of the 5 elders, St. J. Garcia Saturn, was there. He remembers. The government simply chose which parts of that memory the rest of the world was permitted to keep. The scholars of Ohara did not die for treason, they died for reading. Every man, woman, and child on that island, hundreds of people whose only confirmed crime was studying stone tablets written in a forbidden script, was executed by a buster call, the Marines' highest and most absolute military response, one that treats an entire island as a single target to be erased rather than a population to be arrested. Professor Clover begged the world government for a chance to explain what the scholars had actually found. He was answered with warships. A young girl named Nico Olvia stayed behind so her daughter could escape by boat, and the last thing Olvia did with her final moments was tell her child, who was already crying, already grieving in advance, that living itself was not a crime, no matter what the world had just decided about her. That sentence, delivered in the middle of a massacre, became the quiet foundational law that an 8-year-old Nico Robin carried with her for the next 20 years of a life spent being hunted by the very institution that murdered her mother. Saul, the giant vice admiral who chose to help Robin escape Ohara rather than follow the Buster Call order, was frozen alive, encased in ice by Admiral Kuzan on the same night, for the crime of refusing to participate in a massacre of children. Oda has never softened this detail in any interview. Saul froze to death making sure a little girl could keep running, and he did it while laughing, telling her that even if the world called her a demon, he would never see her as one. It is one of the story's gentlest deaths, tucked inside one of its cruelest nights. The reason no one is permitted to read the poneglyphs, on pain of death, on pain of a buster call, on pain of the destruction of entire islands, is confirmed to be simple. The stones record the truth about a 100-year period that has been erased from every official document in the world, a period called the Void Century, and the world government has organized its entire existence around making sure that truth stays buried. What was erased was not a war in the ordinary sense. It was the deliberate, coordinated destruction of a kingdom, confirmed in the text to have existed, whose name Oda has stated exists but has chosen never to reveal. 20 kingdoms allied against it. That kingdom lost, and the alliance that destroyed it became the founding families of the world government, the same families who now sit above the clouds in merry Joaz, untouched by the world they govern. The world nobles themselves carry a darkness that the story rarely lets its audience look away from once it is shown. A world noble may shoot a slave for existing too close to him and face no consequence, a fact confirmed directly in the Sabodi arc when St. Charlos shot Hatchin at point-blank range simply because a fishman dared to speak near him. World nobles may claim any land they wish, evict its people, and rename it, a right they hold simply through bloodline, and any Marine who intervenes on a citizen's behalf against a world noble is required by law to be executed alongside them. Fisher Tiger, the fishman who once tore down the walls of Mary Joaze itself and freed every slave inside, did it not for glory, but because he had personally been enslaved as a child and had personally watched other slaves die of exhaustion, disease, and violence, chained beside him, before he ever became strong enough to break the chains himself. If this is helping you drift, you're welcome to subscribe, and tell me quietly where you're listening from tonight. The human auctioning house on Sabaudi Archipelago, run by Disco under Doflamingo's authority, sold devil fruit users at inflated prices precisely because a devil fruit user who cannot swim can never truly escape by sea, making them, in the auctioneer's own confirmed words, the perfect commodity. Kami the mermaid was moments from being sold into permanent slavery when Luffy intervened, and the story is careful to specify that this was not an isolated horror. It was routine. It happened every week in that building, to people whose names the story never gets the chance to learn. Impel Down, the great underwater prison, holds a level below its official lowest level, a level that does not appear on any map given to new guards, called Level 5.5, Nukama Land, a hidden refuge built by escaped prisoners for those the world above had discarded for being different in ways the world refused to accept. Its existence is itself an indictment of what the 5 official levels contain. Level 6 holds prisoners sentenced to death, whose torment is prolonged specifically to maximize suffering before execution. Level 4 is a boiling hell where prisoners are lowered into literal magma heat as routine punishment. Sadi-chan, the chief warden beneath Magellan, is confirmed in the text to genuinely enjoy the suffering she inflicts, treating torture not as duty, but as private pleasure. And Oda drew her that way on purpose, refusing his readers the comfort of imagining cruelty always needs a justification. Don Quixote, Doflamingo's darkness begins earlier than most readers expect, and it begins with his own family rather than his enemies. Born a world noble, he watched his father Homing voluntarily give up their celestial dragon status out of guilt over what the family's privilege represented. The family was cast out of Mary Joise and, stripped of protection, was hunted by the very citizens their bloodline had once oppressed. Doflamingo watched his mother die of illness, with no doctor willing to treat a former world noble. He watched a mob shoot his father in the street. He was 10 years old, and the confirmed, quietly devastating detail is that his little brother Rocinante, who would grow up to become the undercover Marine Corazon, tried to shield their father's body from him, tried to keep the image from burning itself into a child's memory, and failed. Doflamingo shot his own father shortly after, not entirely understanding what he was doing, already broken by the world's cruelty, into something that would go on to break countless other lives across 2 more decades. Corazon's own death is one of the story's most quietly devastating confirmed sequences. He spent years undercover inside his own brother's crew, mute by choice, so no one could ever surprise a confession out of him, protecting a sick, contagious child named Law that his crewmates wanted dead. He was shot repeatedly by Doflamingo in the final moments of his life, and used what remained of his strength to carry Law to the one place on Earth that could cure the amber-lead syndrome poisoning his small body, dying with a smile because the boy at least was going to live. Law's home country, Flevance, called the White City for the pure white snow that fell there year-round, was wiped from the map entirely by the world government once it was discovered the land had been mined for a substance that caused fatal, incurable poisoning in its own people. Rather than treat the population or warn the world honestly, the government simply let Flevance be erased, quarantined, and forgotten. Its surviving children treated as contagious monsters by outsiders who threw stones at them for a disease they never chose and could not spread. Sanji's childhood inside the Germa kingdom is a darker story than most sleep content ever slows down long enough to sit with. His father, Vinsmoke Judge, genetically modified his own children before birth to remove ordinary human weaknesses like fear, pain, and empathy, and when Sanji was born with those very things intact, Judge treated his own son as a defective product rather than a child, locking him away, starving him, and allowing his siblings to be told he was already dead. Sanji's mother, Sora, is confirmed to have deliberately taken on the physical toll of the genetic modification serum meant for her unborn children in an attempt to spare them some of its coldness, a sacrifice that cost her her own life, and that Sanji did not learn the full truth of until he was an adult, standing in the ruins of the home that had rejected him. If this brings you comfort, feel free to subscribe and get a little more comfortable before we continue. Wano Country's darkness is layered deep enough that it took Oda an entire arc to fully unpack it. Kurozumi Orochi orchestrated the massacre of the Kozuki clan, and confirmed in the text is the detail that he did this specifically so he could seize the shogunate for himself while wearing the stolen face of legitimacy. Kozuki Oden, the daimyo who had opened Wano's borders and tried to bring it into the wider world, was publicly boiled alive over the course of an hour, a punishment designed to be slow enough that his followers, forced to watch, could not intervene without dying uselessly themselves, and Odin sang for the entire hour, refusing to let his death be the silence Orochi wanted. Orochi kept the country drugged, quite literally, distributing smile devil fruits that had a failure rate stripping victims of the ability to express emotion permanently, turning ordinary citizens into hollow-eyed shells for Kaido's amusement and profit, while the country starved under an artificial famine engineered so the wealthy in the flower capital could live in decadence. Kaido's own darkness includes a detail Oda confirmed almost in passing that reframes the character entirely. Kaido has tried to end his own life more times than the story ever directly counts, throwing himself from impossible heights, walking willingly into battles designed to kill him, and failing every single time simply because his body will not let him die, a curse of his own strength that the story treats with genuine, uncomfortable weight rather than as a joke. His warehouse beneath Onigashima, filled with citizens transformed into living toys for his crew's entertainment, some of them children, stands as one of the most disturbing single images the manga has ever published. Charlotte Linland's darkness is rooted in a confirmed detail about her childhood that recasts her entire adult monstrousness. As a child on Elbaf, her uncontrollable hunger periods, later revealed to be tied to a condition affecting her entire life, led her to injure and even accidentally kill people around her during episodes she could not control. And the woman who raised her, Carmel, is confirmed to have used orphaned children as a literal food source for the homies she created, meaning the earliest home Linland ever knew was already built on a foundation of exploitation and quiet horror long before she ever built Whole Cake Island in its image. Caesar Clown's experiments on Punk Hazard remain among the darkest single images the series has ever committed to paper. He tested a gas of his own design on kidnapped children, shrinking some permanently, killing others outright, and kept the survivors imprisoned as ongoing test subjects for years, treating their suffering as acceptable data collection. Law's own history briefly intersects with this facility, and the story does not let the reader forget that this was not a hidden rumor. It was funded, at least in part, by systems connected to the world government's own scientific programs. The destruction of Lulusia Kingdom, confirmed within a single chapter to have erased an entire nation and every person on it using a weapon under the world government's own authority, was met with almost no acknowledgement from the wider world of the story, a silence Oda uses deliberately to show how easily the deaths of an entire population can be absorbed and ignored by a system built to protect its own image above all else. You're doing wonderfully. If your eyes are getting heavy, that's all right. Feel free to subscribe before you drift further, and know there's no need to stay awake for the rest. Fishman Island's confirmed history includes centuries of documented discrimination against fishermen and merfolk by human society, discrimination so entrenched that Arlong's hatred, monstrous as his actions were, grew from a genuinely lived history of enslavement, violence, and humiliation. His people endured for generations, including the death of Fisher Tiger from injuries sustained during his own escape from slavery, weakened permanently by wounds that never properly healed. Skypia's history includes the confirmed genocide of the original Shandia people by the Sky Knights working under Enel's predecessors, their homeland stolen and their survivors pushed to the margins of their own sky, while Enel himself ruled through trials called God's ordeals. Elaborate death traps disguised as tests of faith that had killed uncounted numbers of Sky Pian citizens over the years before Luffy ever arrived. The Marineford War's confirmed final moments hold one of the story's heaviest images, an execution staged deliberately as public spectacle, broadcast to the entire world specifically to demoralize anyone who still believed freedom was possible, a plan that collapsed only because Whitebeard's entire crew and eventually much of the underworld refused to let a single life be taken as theater. Portgas D. Ace's death, confirmed to be the direct result of him turning back to protect Luffy after Akainu's fist was already committed to killing him, mirrors a promise Ace made silently as a child, that his little brother would never again lose someone the way Ace himself had already lost so much. Marshal D. Teach, confirmed simply as Blackbeard, murdered his own crewmate Thatch in cold blood for a devil fruit, and then walked directly into Marineford to hand Ace over as a bargaining chip for his own advancement. Betrayals the story never asks its reader to forgive or explain away. His own devil fruit ability, allowing him to hold 2 devil fruits when the story's rules say this should be biologically impossible, remains one of the darkest unresolved mysteries still sitting quietly in the text, a rule broken by a man the narrative treats as fundamentally wrong, in a way that goes beyond ordinary villainy. Even smaller, quieter darknesses sit folded into the crew's own backstories. Nami's mother, Bellamere, was shot in front of her by Arlong after refusing to hand over money meant to buy her daughter's freedom, and Nami spent the following 8 years drawing maps for the very man who killed her, smiling in his presence, because she had calculated it was the only path that might eventually free her village. Usopp's mother, Banshina, died of illness, while his father, Yasopp, was still at sea with Shanks, and Usopp spent his childhood lying to himself and to his village about his father's absence long before he learned to spin the lies that would define his early adventuring persona. Chopper's mentor, Hiluluk, died slowly of a treatable illness because he refused to stop giving away the medicine meant for himself to patients who could not afford it, and the village that had once mocked him only came to understand what he'd sacrificed after it was already too late to thank him. Zoro's promise to become the world's greatest swordsman was made over the body of a childhood friend, Kuina, who died from a fall down a single flight of stairs, an accident so mundane it makes the loss somehow heavier rather than lighter. Frankie was nearly executed for a crime he did not commit when Iceberg, his own mentor, was shot, and the frame was engineered by Spandam of CP9 to eliminate Iceberg's knowledge of Pluton's blueprints, a plot in which an innocent man's life meant nothing measured against a weapon's schematics. If any of this is sitting heavy, that's all right. Feel free to subscribe, and remember, you're safe right where you are. The ancient weapon Pluton, a warship confirmed capable of leveling an island in a single attack, was hidden, and its blueprints ultimately burned by Frankie specifically because he understood, without needing the full history explained to him, that a weapon of that scale in the wrong hands was a horror waiting to happen. Poseidon, confirmed to be a living person rather than an object, places an enormous involuntary burden onto whoever is born with the ability, currently Princess Shirahoshi, whose entire life has been shaped around the fear of what the world would do to her or force her to do to others if her power were ever fully understood by the wrong people. Uranus remains the one ancient weapon whose nature Oda has never confirmed even slightly, a silence held so completely across 30 years that its eventual reveal is treated by longtime readers as inevitable and enormous. The five elders themselves, the shadow rulers standing above even the Gorosei's public face, answer to a figure named Im, confirmed within the story to sit upon the empty throne that the rest of the world believes does not exist, casting votes and issuing judgments from behind a curtain of total secrecy, including the confirmed authority to erase a country's existence from every map and every record simply by deciding it should no longer be remembered. Even the Void Century's central figure, Joy Boy, carries a darkness wrapped in tenderness rather than violence. His confirmed message on Fishman Island is an apology, a promise he could not keep, left behind for a people who waited centuries for a rescue that never arrived in his lifetime. A message so sincere that Oda chose to leave it as the single confirmed personal correspondence carved anywhere into the poneglyphs. Bartholomew Kuma's confirmed history is one of the quietest, heaviest tragedies the manga has ever told. And it is easy to miss because for most of the story he appears only as a silent, unreadable figure standing beside the warlords. Kuma was born on the Sorbet Kingdom, a nation of enslaved people ruled from above by a world noble, and as a young man he joined the Gods' Knights, a resistance movement, before eventually becoming a revolutionary alongside Dragon. What the story confirms is that Kuma, dying slowly of an illness and desperate to protect his daughter Bonnie from watching him fade, agreed to let Vegapunk erase his memories and convert his body into an obedient weapon for the world government, a living pacifista prototype stripped of his own will, his own history, and eventually his own capacity to speak. For years afterward, the man who had once loved his daughter enough to make that unbearable trade was forced to serve the very government that had enslaved his people, his consciousness reduced to something the story describes as barely present, surfacing only in isolated, involuntary moments, one of which he spent using his remaining strength to save Luffy's life without any command telling him to do so. An act the government could never fully explain and never fully controlled. Bonnie herself carries a mirrored darkness. Her devil fruit allows her to alter her own age, and Vegapunk's later experiments confirm that her body was altered before she was old enough to consent to any of it. Her true age concealed even from herself for years. A manipulation layered directly on top of the grief of watching her father disappear into the weapon the government made of him. The Reverie, the world government's grand summit, meant to project unity and order to the world, has been the site of confirmed, quiet violence more than once. An assassination attempt during the most recent Reverie targeted Princess Vivi directly, and the chaos that followed exposed just how thin the appearance of order at the top of the world's power structure actually is. Beneath the summit's polished ceremony, kings and queens who privately despise the world government's methods are forced to sit in the same halls as the celestial dragons who oppress their own citizens, smiling for a peace that is enforced rather than chosen. Charlotte Linland's long list of husbands and the fates that met them is confirmed to be far darker than the comedic tone the story sometimes wraps around it. Several of her husbands died under circumstances directly or indirectly tied to her own uncontrollable rage, and her children were, by her own admission in the text, conceived as part of a deliberate dynastic strategy rather than out of love, a detail Oda has confirmed was intentional, framing an empire built quite literally on the manufacturing of a family rather than the raising of one. Charlotte Pudding, born with a third eye, she was taught by her own mother to be ashamed of and to hide beneath her hair, was raised specifically to seduce and betray Sanji as part of a wedding designed to end with the entire Vinsmoke and Straw Hat parties massacred at the altar, a plan Big Mom had been arranging for years before either family involved understood they were being maneuvered into it. The birdcage that Don Quixote Doflamingo raised over the entirety of Dressrosa during the final days of his reign was not a metaphor. It was confirmed as a literal shrinking wall of blades encircling the entire kingdom, designed to kill every single citizen inside it, over 10,000 people, the moment it fully closed, a punishment Doflamingo was prepared to inflict on an entire nation simply because he was losing control of it, treating a country's population as something disposable the instant it stopped being useful to him. Gecko Moria's entire original crew, once one of the strongest on the Grand Line, was confirmed to have been wiped out almost completely by Kaido in a single, one-sided battle, a loss so total that it left Moria the only survivor of his own crew for years, hollowed out by grief long before a thriller bark ever gave him the twisted purpose of stealing other people's shadows to rebuild the army he had lost. Perona, who stayed by his side afterward, is one of the few people in the story who understood that Moria's monstrous later actions grew out of a devastation the world never gave him room to grieve properly. Vegapunk's presence in the story's more recent chapters has unearthed a darker layer of the world government's scientific ambitions than readers had previously been shown directly. Vegapunk himself, confirmed to be kept under close government watch specifically because his knowledge is considered a threat, revealed that he had been ordered for years to conduct research. The government refused to let the wider world know existed, and confirmed that Cipher Pol operatives were dispatched with orders to eliminate him and destroy his satellites entirely, rather than risk that knowledge escaping their control. The attempted purge of Egghead Island, an attack authorized at the very highest level of the government against a facility technically still working under that same government's banner, revealed with total clarity that the world government's confirmed policy toward inconvenient truths has never changed in 900 years. Silence the people who know too much, whatever the cost, whoever they are. St. J. Garcia, Saturn's true form, confirmed within recent chapters to be something other than human. In the way the story has generally used that word, adds a final, quiet unease to everything readers already knew about the Five Elders. A figure old enough to remember God Valley personally, powerful enough to stand as one of the five hidden hands steering the entire world government, and inhuman enough that his true nature was kept concealed from the public for the entirety of the story, until very recently, a secret held even more tightly than the Void Century itself. Orochi's rule over Wano depended on a confirmed network of spies embedded throughout the country, including Kanjuro, a member of the Akazaya Nine, who had been secretly loyal to Orochi and Kaido for over 20 years, close enough to Odin's own family to be trusted completely, and cruel enough to let that trust be the exact weapon he used against them, revealing his betrayal only after doing irreversible damage at the moment it would hurt the most. The Devil Fruit system itself carries a darker undertone once its confirmed rules are laid out fully. Every Devil Fruit currently in circulation is, without exception, a power that has already claimed at least one life before its current user ever touched it, cycling from host to host across centuries, meaning every extraordinary ability in the story is built quite literally on a foundation of accumulated death that most of its users will never learn the full history of. If any part of this feels heavy, that's all right. You're safe, and you can subscribe now if you'd like. Then let the rest of this simply wash over you. Amazon Lily's Kuja warriors brand every escaped former slave among them, including Boa Hancock and her sisters, with a mark left by the celestial dragons who once owned them, a mark Hancock wore hidden beneath her clothing for years, ashamed not of what had been done to her, but of what the world would assume about her if it ever saw the scar. The Kuja sisters were purchased, imprisoned, and tortured for years before their eventual escape, a history so painful that Hancock built an entire persona around denying any of it had happened, insisting for years that she alone among the Kuja had never truly been a slave, a lie so complete that even her own sisters allowed it to stand rather than force her to face it. The whole Cake Island wedding, staged as the story's most elaborate celebration, was confirmed from its earliest planning to be a trap engineered to kill nearly everyone attending, including members of Big Mom's own family, who were never told the true purpose of the day they were smiling through. Charlotte Katakuri, one of the few to see through the pageantry entirely, spent the day suppressing his own devil fruit-granted precognition, specifically so he would not be tempted to interfere with his mother's plan, even as it meant walking silently past guests who had no idea they had already been sentenced. The final truth, sitting beneath nearly every dark secret this story has ever confirmed, is a simple, unbending pattern. Almost none of the darkest things that happen in One Piece are committed by monsters in any fantastical sense. They are committed by governments protecting their own image, by parents failing children under the weight of impossible systems, by ordinary cruelty given official permission to become policy. Oda has said in more than one interview that he wanted the darkness in his story to feel earned rather than decorative, close enough to real history that readers would recognize it even inside a world of pirates and devil fruits and giant elephants carrying islands on their backs. Crocodile's plot in Alabasta was darker in its mechanics than its adventure story pacing sometimes lets on. He manufactured a drought by hoarding the kingdom's rain through devil fruit ability, then funneled weapons to both the royalist and rebel sides of the growing civil war he had engineered, ensuring that whichever side eventually won, the population would already be devastated, and the kingdom's people would still owe their survival to him. Confirmed in the text is the detail that Crocodile understood exactly how much suffering this would cause and considered it an entirely reasonable cost against the value of what he was hunting for, a poneglyph hidden beneath the palace pointing toward the ancient weapon, Pluton. Princess Vivi, forced to watch her own country tear itself apart around a lie, spent the entire arc unable to tell her people the truth, because doing so would only accelerate the very war she was trying to stop, a helplessness the story never resolves easily even after Crocodile's defeat. Nico Robin's 20 years as a fugitive, the years between O'Hara's destruction and her joining the Straw Hats, are rarely dwelt on directly in the main story, but are confirmed in supplementary material to have been almost unbearably lonely. She worked for multiple criminal organizations during that time, including Baroque Works. Not out of loyalty to any of them, but because every group she joined eventually discovered what she was and either tried to use her forbidden knowledge or turn her in for the bounty on her head, a bounty that had existed since she was 8 years old, meaning Robin spent more of her life being hunted than not. She has confirmed in the story itself that she expected for 2 decades to die alone, and that she had made a kind of peace with that expectation long before Luffy told her she didn't have to. The assault on Enies Lobby, waged to rescue Robin after she surrendered herself to CP9, specifically to spare her new crew from being destroyed alongside her, involved the Straw Hats declaring open war against the world government itself, tearing down its flag in front of a marine stronghold, an act the story confirms had, at that point in history, never been survived by anyone who attempted it. Spandam, the CP9 leader, who orchestrated the entire frame-up of Nico Robin and Frankie both, is confirmed to have felt no remorse whatsoever for the lives his schemes destroyed, treating Tom's execution and the attempted destruction of an innocent shipwright's legacy as an acceptable byproduct of institutional ambition. Vinsmoke judges Germa Kingdom, beyond what was done to Sanji directly, is confirmed to have engineered all of his other children from before birth to feel nothing resembling ordinary fear or physical pain, a modification the family treated as a triumph of engineering rather than the erasure of something essential in a child. Reiju, the eldest Vinsmoke daughter, secretly and repeatedly poisoned her own body over years in order to build a tolerance and protect her siblings without their father's knowledge, a private act of resistance inside a household that had been designed specifically to make resistance impossible. Kozuki Yamato's confirmed backstory includes years of imprisonment by their own father, Kaido, locked away specifically for refusing to accept the identity Kaido wanted to force onto them, and for insisting instead on carrying forward Odin's legacy and his promised date of rebellion. Yamato marked their own body with the same scars Odin carried, a devotion so complete it became identity itself, maintained through years of solitary confinement inside the very stronghold Kaido ruled. Charlotte Katakuri's confirmed history includes years of concealing his own monstrous mouth behind a scarf, terrified since childhood of how his own family and the wider world would react if they saw it fully, a fear so deep that he trained himself into one of the most powerful fighters in the New World, in part so that no one would ever get close enough to see the thing he was ashamed of. Shanks's scar across his left eye, given to him by a young Blackbeard, remains one of the story's oldest unresolved silences. Oda has confirmed only that the event that caused it was significant enough to shape Shanks's entire understanding of what Teach was capable of becoming, and that Shanks has never once spoken of the specifics to anyone in the story, not even to the crew that has sailed with him for decades. The Rocks Pirates' destruction at God Valley did not end the danger they represented. Weevil, a surviving descendant of Rocks D. Zebek, has confirmed in the story's own text that fragments of that crew's legacy and ambition never fully died, and that the desire to finish what the strongest pirate crew in history started still exists quietly in corners of the world the story has not yet fully shown its audience. The sheer scale of what the world government has erased across 900 years, entire kingdoms, entire scholarly traditions, entire languages, is confirmed in the text to be so complete that most citizens of the world have no idea anything was ever taken from them at all. A darkness so total it does not even register as absence anymore. That, more than any single act of violence in the story, may be the deepest secret One Piece has been telling for 30 years. Some of the worst things a world can do to its people are not the ones it commits loudly. They are the ones it commits so thoroughly that the people living inside the silence never learn there was ever anything to grieve. Sanji's history holds one more confirmed detail that most readers meet only once and never quite recover from. As a young boy shipwrecked with the chef Zeph on a barren rock with no food and only a single portion of provisions between them, Sanji offered his share to the older man, and Zeph in turn secretly gave the food back to the boy while telling him he had already eaten, the two of them lying to each other in opposite directions for 52 days, each one trying to starve quietly so the other could live. Zeph ultimately survived by eating his own leg rather than let the boy he had come to love die of hunger, a sacrifice Sanji did not learn the full truth of for years, and one that explains, more than any single line of dialogue ever could, why he has never once in the story been willing to let a hungry person go unfed. Nefertari Cobra, king of Alabasta, and one of the story's gentlest confirmed rulers, was murdered during the reverie by Im, the hidden figure sitting on the empty throne, simply for getting too close to a truth the world government had spent 900 years protecting. His death was staged to look like something else entirely, and the world was told a story that was not the truth, a final small echo of the same pattern repeating itself once again at the very top of the world's power structure. Vivi, his daughter, was not even permitted an honest accounting of how her own father died. Monkey D. Garp made a choice early in Luffy's life that the story confirms was never told to Luffy directly until Garp himself finally admitted it years later. Garp knew from the moment Ace was born that the boy was Gold D. Roger's son, and he chose to raise Ace in secret rather than let the world government learn the truth, fully aware of what the government would do to a child carrying that particular bloodline if it were ever discovered. Garp made the same choice again with Luffy, raising both boys under a silence meant to protect them, a silence that could not, in the end, protect Ace from Marineford. Sabo's disappearance from Luffy and Ace's lives for over a decade is confirmed to have been caused by a celestial dragon ship which opened fire on Sabo's small boat without provocation, without consequence, and without so much as an inquiry afterward, simply because a world noble had grown bored and Sabo's boat happened to be within range. Sabo survived by chance alone, was found and raised by the Revolutionary Army with no memory of who he had been, and for years believed himself to be someone else entirely, meaning that for a decade both of the brothers who loved him grieved a death that had never technically happened, while Sabo grieved nothing at all because he could not remember there was anything to grieve. Every single one of these secrets, the God Valley Incident's stolen truth, O'Hara's silenced scholars, Wano's decades of engineered suffering, Kuma's erased memory, Roger's final joke played on the entire world, sits underneath the same bright, laughing surface that made this story feel safe enough to fall asleep to in the first place. That contrast is not a contradiction. It is, according to Oda's own confirmed intentions across 3 decades of interviews, the entire point. A world worth saving has to actually be worth saving, has to have real darkness pressing against it, or the laughter covering that darkness means nothing at all. The Straw Hats do not ignore the horror their world contains. They have simply decided arc after arc, island after island, that horror does not get the final word. A few smaller secrets remain, quiet enough that most readers walk past them without noticing, but real enough to sit with before we close tonight. The Germa kingdom's ordinary soldiers, the faceless armored troops who march beneath the Windsmoke banner, are confirmed to be cloned in mass from a single genetic template, an army grown rather than recruited, each of them raised with no name of their own and no expectation that they would ever need one, disposable in a way the story never lingers on but never quite lets the reader forget either. Drake, a Marine turned pirate turned worst generation captain, carries the surname of his father, Diaz Barrels, a man so violent that even other pirates of his era feared him, and Drake's confirmed early life involved growing up in his father's crew before eventually being the one to end Barrels' life himself. A patricide the story treats with unusual quiet, offering no triumph in the moment, only the exhausted relief of a boy who had simply run out of other options. The raid on Onigashima, the single largest confirmed battle in the story's history, resulted in a death toll among ordinary beast pirate soldiers that the story never states outright, but implies through the sheer scale of the collapsing fortress and the small army required to hold it, was enormous. A number the narrative chooses to leave unspoken, focusing instead on the handful of names its readers had come to know, a quiet acknowledgement that most of the people who die in a war this size are never given the dignity of being remembered by name at all. Baroque Works, the criminal organization Crocodile built to seize Alabasta, was structured so that almost no agent within it knew the true identity of any other agent, including their leader, a design meant to prevent betrayal, but that also meant every single person working inside the organization was, by its very architecture, permanently alone, surrounded by colleagues they were forbidden to trust or even properly know. The shipwrights of Sabori Archipelago, whose coating technology allows vessels to survive the pressure of the ocean floor on the path into the New World, built their entire local economy around a service that exists only because the world above them made the alternative route through Reverse Mountain and Paradise so dangerous that most crews cannot survive it twice, meaning an entire town's livelihood was constructed quietly and without anyone framing it this way, around the ongoing danger of a road the world government has never once tried to make safer. And so we come, finally, to the treasure itself, sitting untouched on an island that did not have a name until the day someone finally reached it and laughed instead of wept. The One Piece has been waiting the entire length of this story, the entire length of every secret we have walked through tonight, for someone who understands that the discovery at the end of the world was never going to be a pile of gold large enough to answer every dark thing that came before it. Oda has confirmed that Roger's crew's laughter at Laugh-Tale was genuine, unforced, born of finally understanding something about the world that made even 900 years of erased history feel for one single moment survivable. We have walked through God Valley and O'Hara, through the White City and the Flower Capital, through Impel Down's hidden floor and Punk Hazard's frozen laboratories, through the quiet griefs carried individually by 9 people who found each other on a single ship, and decided, against every dark thing the world had shown them, to keep laughing anyway. That, in the end, may be the story's true final secret, the one hiding beneath all 150 of the others. The darkness in One Piece was never hidden to frighten its readers. It was placed there so the light the Straw Hats carry into every arc would mean something real, earned against a world that has given them every reason not to trust it, and offered anyway. Thanks for drifting through these darker corners of One Piece with me tonight. If you're ready for something gentler, there's a calmer video waiting just to the left. Let it carry you the rest of the way into rest.